Umar Ibn Al Khattab had a few close encounters with Islam before he became a Muslim. He says that one day he was near the Kaaba when the Prophet, peace be upon him, walked by. By this time Umar was well aware of the situation in Mecca regarding Islam, because he was the nephew of Abu Jahl. Umar says that the Prophet came and stood in front of the Kaaba, in between the Rukn al-Yamani, the Yemeni corner, and al-Hajar al-Aswad, the black stone. Standing in that direction allowed the Prophet to pray not only towards the Kaaba, but also towards Masjid al-Aqsa. This was his method of combining the two qiblas. Note: at this time, the Prophet was able to pray openly, in public, because he had a certain amount of protection from his uncle Abu Talib. Abu Talib still commanded enough respect in Mecca to protect the Prophet. So Umar says that the Prophet started to pray and he, Umar, wondered to himself about all the fuss surrounding the Prophet and Islam. Umar was the diplomat of Quraysh and a very intelligent man, so he decided to go listen to what the Prophet had to say. So he walked up behind the Prophet, close enough to hear what he was reciting, and the Prophet was reciting Surah Al-Haqqah. Umar says that he was completely gripped and kept listening. He says that these words had a very powerful effect on him, but he also says, at the same time, that he was stubborn and arrogant, so he talked himself out of it. He says that he thought to himself, this man, the Prophet, is a really talented poet, but that as soon as he thought this, the Prophet recited this ayah. And it is not the word of a poet. Little is it that you believe. 69-41. Umar says that the second he heard this, he was caught off guard. It was like having the wind knocked out of him, and he was wondering how the Prophet knew what he was thinking. Umar says that his next thought was, well then he must be a sorcerer, or a magician, or a soothsayer. He says that the Prophet then recited this ayah. Nor the word of a soothsayer. Little is it that you mind. Surah Al-Haqqah 69-42. Umar says that after hearing this ayah, he was completely floored. The Prophet continued reciting Surah Al-Haqqah. It is a revelation from the Lord of the worlds. And if he, the Prophet, had fabricated against us some of the sayings, we would certainly have seized him by the right hand. Then we would certainly have cut off his aorta. And not one of you could have withheld this from him. And most surely we know that some of you are rejectors. And most surely it is the true certainty. Therefore, glorify the name of your Lord, the Great. Surah Al-Haqqah 69-43-52. Umar says that this end part of Surah Al-Haqqah literally broke him down spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, and that he walked away completely bewildered. He says though, that he tried to forget this experience and didn't accept Islam, but eventually, as we know, he would have another encounter with the Quran and then he would accept Islam.